About like 1, 2.
Yeah.
Good morning. Oh. Great to see everybody. Welcome to the talk with the most loaded title imaginable. Hope everybody had fun last night. Feeling fresh? Yeah? Good. Let's see if this works. Gameplay update. So let's just start by telling you what I'm going to try and cover in this hour. So as you heard yesterday, we have ramped up a new team to take on consistent veteran-focused challenge. And we're kind of just now getting up to full speed. So what I want to do here is basically just give you a snapshot of exactly where we're at and what we're working on. I want to talk a little bit about where we're coming from, although I'll leave most of that to Larrikin and Ghost to talk about the summer. But after that, I'll talk more in detail about the releases I told you about yesterday, the Warp Speed release we already did, and then the stuff we have coming up. And then after that, I want to spend some time talking about where we're trying to go, what we think needs attention, and what we're likely to be working on in the near future. So I hope that this will just give us a lot to talk about, set the ground for a lot of feedback, and let you guys know sort of where we're headed. So starting a bit with Chaos Era, I just want to say that we're built very much to try and carry on the positives that we took from the summer, from being more disruptive, taking a braver approach. But the sort of gap between the Chaos Era changes and now is about trying to set up a structure that could support that in a sustainable way. Because doing Chaos Era the way it was kind of in the middle of the summer was not, we wouldn't have been able to keep that up without things getting really rough internally. So we're pivoting a bit so that we can do it in a more kind of healthy way. There is a ton of amazing details and nitty-gritty to get into with Larrikin, so I definitely recommend checking out his data talk, and you'll see a lot about the very specific effects of what happened during Chaos Era. But I'm not going to go into that so much, but I do want to say that we're actually working really closely with them to integrate all of their learnings onto what we're doing on our team. Larrikin's actually going to be kind of half-time on Team Talos to give us a lot of input on both the effects of our changes we're going to be making in the future and the stuff that happened over the summer. But I did want to check in a little bit on those learnings from the summer and talk about them some, just so you have context for what we're trying to do. And the biggest area, like I talked about yesterday, was speed and flexibility, and that was really hard for us. And to expand a bit on that, this is what makes things like wormhole and faction warfare changes, that kind of thing, really tough. Because in the structure we usually work in, for those things to get attention or for anything to get attention, it needs to make its way into a full kind of project priority. So for us to do faction warfare rework, it would need to rise above any of the NPE team work or whatever else would be competing with it. And so with faction warfare as an example, it's almost done that 3 times in the last 4 years. It's been the next thing on a backlog of reworks or big projects that would be going to a team for a long period of time. But because it doesn't make it up high enough in that priority list, it doesn't get any attention at all. And that's kind of the big problem, and the big thing we're learning is that for the things that we really need to be iterating on and improving, but don't quite make it into that upper tier of priority for us to dedicate a whole team to, they just get ignored or stagnate. And that's a big issue. So we want some structure where we're able to make changes in areas like that without having to say this team has 3 months to go deep on faction warfare. And then deployment was another big part of that. Just we have a certain deployment process, and that puts a certain amount of delay on everything we do between when we decide to do it and when you get it. We want to speed that up a little bit if we can. Next big area of learning, this bullet should just say understanding the sandbox, basically, because by making these big changes, we learned a lot about how people play and how they're affected. We did something like trying to change the ISK faucet and did that, but did it in this kind of, I don't know, really simplistic way without understanding where exactly different parts of the faucet come from or who would be affected. And that applies to social group distribution. How are people in really big alliances affected compared to small ones? How are rich players or high-income players affected compared to the low-income? And we're learning a ton about that now, so that's informing a lot of what we're doing afterwards. And then the last one, which is also the point I tried to finish on yesterday, is that big changes have a lot of upsides. One of the biggest ones is just having clear results we can act on. So when we decide whether or not blackout should stay or go, we have really clear information about how to make that decision. Whereas if we do more incremental small changes, it's a lot tougher to tease out what the lesson is. Driving discussion in marketing is another big deal. We really want to focus on this more and try and bring dev and our external communication and marketing more in line so that you guys know what to be excited about, you know what's going on, and can have a fun discussion about that rather than this shotgun of stuff that's hard to figure out exactly what's important. And then, of course, just challenging you guys and making sure there's actually valuable things coming into the game. So rather than going through all the chaos era changes, I just wanted to stop on Sino changes because I was more directly involved with that as an example of how this went. We have been talking about Sino changes for a really long time. Last year in Vegas, I spent 6 hours talking with the same group of players about their frustration with Sinos and response times. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff like this where we've been discussing it for years and years. Null local is another good example. AFK cloaking is another example. There's a whole bunch of things in this category. And usually, when they're right on the fence like this, we don't take much action, or if we do, it's really small. So coming out of Vegas last year and talking at the start of this summer, I would have expected we just do a mobile inhib buff to change the situation with Sinos. But with the sort of chaos era mentality, we went much harder to try and get much more extreme results. And that worked out great. It didn't necessarily mean this change was good, but it gave us way more information. The conversation we can have now about what needs to happen with Sinos is a lot clearer and more interesting than it would have been with just a gradual inhib buff, for instance. On the actual Sino results themselves, a whole bunch of things happened we didn't expect. We thought ratting, capital ratting income or mining from rorquals would go down because of the added risk. Turns out that's not the case at all. Once blackout was over, PvE activity from capitals looked exactly like it did beforehand. Which is really interesting. There is added risk. The response time's slower, but it didn't keep people from doing those activities, which is actually a great win. I mean, we're happy to have added risk at the same income. That's good. We also totally underestimated the effect on sort of general PvP and roaming. We've heard a lot of feedback that it's been really powerful to have a better kind of idea of what to expect in a fight, whether or not you're going to get dropped, and be able to plan around that, which is really cool. And the biggest surprise, our number one concern, was that this would squash the chance for escalations, that recons would die so fast that big fights just wouldn't happen. And there hasn't been much time yet to know exactly how that's going to pan out, but for now, the feedback we're getting from most FCs is that this is actually in a really good place, and they're really interested in where that meta's at and where it's going to go. So that's all really positive. On the negative side, we know that we created a lot more cost and hassle, especially for smaller groups. So I think part of the conversation going forward about Sinos is going to be how to give more options to make things like travel with capitals more convenient and less obnoxious and expensive. But all of that conversation is in a really good place because we have this extreme change to work with to start from. We have a way better starting point than we would have with a gradual change. While we're talking about Sinos, I wanted to show you, we've been doing a bunch of kind of prototyping bizarre ideas, like the Titan mutaplasmid I had in the presentation yesterday, just trying weird stuff. And this one, when we were talking about Sinos, one of the big limitations we ran into in talking to you guys is that it sounds super fun, the idea that capital fleets would come in off-grid or would have to position in more complicated ways and then move to fights. But because of bumping especially, it's so unreliable to move capitals where you want when you come in that you really need to be in exactly where the fight is. So we started messing around with what it looks like when capitals come in. CCP Signal did a whole couple days of just exploring options for what it could look like coming in on a Sino. which is pretty cool. And in this version, this is just distributing them. I think they're still bumping. Yeah, so this is randomly placing them just at longer ranges based on the size of the ship. We've got a version since this where it actually places them progressively farther the more ships come through the same sino. So when you're just coming in yourself on a station, you don't get put 40K from the sino, but maybe as the fleet gets more and more pile in, it spreads them out more, so you have less bumping. I don't know if we'll actually end up shipping any of this, but I thought it was cool, and it's the kind of thing that we're looking into to try and improve some of these dynamics. Thanks, man. What? Oh, dude, programmers have no idea how to fit Eve ships. They're really, really bad at it. All right, so, and I mean CCP programmers, to be fair. I'm sure there's many of you that are just fine at it. All right, let's talk about the updates we've made so far and the ones we have coming up in the near future. This one, pretty simple. Talked about this yesterday, 2 weeks ago. Updated warp speeds for bigger ships. This is a nice step. Here the only thing we need to make sure and preserve is some distinction between classes, so there's still some tactical gameplay. And Angel ships are breaking the crap out of that right now, so it's possible we need to think about that a little bit at some point soon. But for now, it's fine, and we're really happy to speed things up a bit. I know everybody is pretty hungry for a heavier meta, more battlecruisers and battleships, so this feels like step one sort of on that path. It also is really great to get roaming times down. That's something we're going to be focused on quite a bit, I think, for the next couple months, is trying to figure out ways that we can get you to content faster without hurting the integrity of the geography of the universe, and this is a good example of that. Just if you do 80 jumps in battlecruisers, you maybe cut an hour off that now, and then, or whatever it is, and that's just a win for everyone, basically. So moving from that to interceptors. Talked to you guys about this yesterday. These are the actual numbers. The main thing I wanted to say here is that I know there's a lot of proposals for kind of more gimmicky solutions to making interceptors stand out, giving them like faster probe strength or not letting their micro-warps get turned off by scrams, that kind of thing. It's possible that something like that will be a good direction to go if we can't get them into viability from a more kind of normal route like this, but thought this was worth a try first, and we really like the idea of separating assault frigates and interceptors based on speed. Like one is heavier, tankier, one is faster, more glass cannony. But these were doing, combat interceptors were doing way less damage than assault frigates, which just felt kind of weird. So just bumping this up. Hopefully that makes them more interesting, and we'll see where we are in a couple months. And then the other side of that, slowing assault frigates back down. This fitting nerf to the JAG is pretty small. It probably won't change anything too fundamental about how it works, so we may have to keep looking at that, but the speed change is pretty significant, so we'll see how that goes. Next up, we have the Halloween event, the 100% loot drop for player ships. This is... I'm glad you guys are excited. I set this slide up expecting people to be really nervous about it. There are some serious risks with this. But we're really actually excited about this because it's the kind of change that takes almost no actual dev time for us to do, but we can learn a lot. We can learn a ton about behavior through this. How much does loot act as an incentive for people to do things? Are we going to see wormhole raids and people killing things because of the added reward? Are we going to see people undocking more in faction warfare or other environments because of the loot? Or do people not actually care very much about that, and we could even drop less of it? And then, we could dig into how much looted module drops have to do with like total material sink in the game. But this is just a good reason for us to do that and look at kind of two different groups where there's different drop rates, so we can figure out how much effect this has. And we really like this kind of experiment and want to do more of it. Blackout's maybe like the most extreme version of that kind of thing, but there's smaller versions like this where we can still learn a lot without being quite as dramatic or stressing people out so much, I guess. But yeah, so hopefully this is just super fun for us. All right, so the Boosh update. I got some specifics for you here, and before I put the actual change to command destroyers, basically this is a really tough one. Command destroyers are near and dear to my heart, and the micro jump field generator has been a really, I think, one of the most successful like sandbox tool additions we've made in a long time, where there's just so many different things you can do with it. Creativity has led it to a lot of different uses, and since kind of day one with it, there's been a strong contingent of people saying it's too much for one reason or another, but as time's gone on, that's really centered around the massive fleet movement, around like sieging wormhole structures with ravens that can never be caught and are basically invincible. Stukas, of course. And so that doesn't feel very healthy. So we want to find a way to preserve a lot of the other uses where you still can do all your spear fishing, you can still steal excavators, and you can still nab people from the enemy fleet and isolate them and kill them, but you don't have this incredibly reliable way to infinitely move people around a grid. So what we're going to do is make it so that micro jump field generators have a cap on how many ships they can move. Like, tentative. So you'll be able to move up to the cap in ships. The cap will ignore drones, fighters, probes, anything other than player ships, and we'll pick those ships randomly from the ships within range. So if you're trying to move 100 Ravens, you could hope that you get lucky with your, well, you're going to need more command destroyers no matter what, and then you could accidentally jump your own command destroyers and then have Ravens left behind. So you could then split your Ravens up into a couple little squads, but then you're way more difficult to organize. You're losing logistics support, that kind of thing. So of course, this number is just a stab in the dark. We were talking about bigger numbers, but that was concerning to wormholers. We were talking about smaller numbers, and that was concerning to nulls. So we're going to go in the middle here and see how that feels for both ecosystems. The next thing on the list for this update is the boson change. We're going to increase the SIG on the boson from 2,000 to 10,000. We're going to take away a lot of the power against subcaps, make it so there's more room for anything subcap to be on a grid and not get deleted off by bosons. It's also going to affect ratting, of course, and we're fine with all that. We're also going to turn down Dromi web amount. This is a really small, I know support fighters are kind of up there among the most problematic things still left for supers, but we're not going to do anything with sirens in this update. Just going to take Dromi web amount down a little bit so that at least if they're doing tackling, it's not quite as powerful. And then something I didn't mention at all yesterday, which hopefully most of you are excited about, is we are going to make the minimum anchor range for Anselblex and Tenebrex 500K in this update as well. This has been, structures and a lot of the dynamics around structures has been definitely the most popular topic here in Vegas and everywhere else for the last few months. We have a lot of changes we want to make. This one we're going to start with. Anselblex especially seemed like a great opportunity for more kind of small-scale guerrilla warfare type content, but it's just being totally stamped out by the pressure from the Fortizar and the Keepstars. So by moving it outside range, hopefully it's a kind of more of a spark point for things to actually happen. I know a lot of people want scramming to disallow jumping back through. We're not going to do that in this update, but it's definitely on the table. Wanted to try this first and see kind of if this is interesting. An important point here, if you already have these set up, they will be grandfathered in. We're not going to move anything from where it is now. This will just be for newly anchored. Funny. There was one line there, just don't worry about it. It's probably just not going in the update, so we'll see. After that, 2 weeks later, we have rapid fire I mentioned. I'm still not going to talk a ton about details here. There's going to be a couple ships affected by this one, mostly positively, and then a certain weapon system is going to get a little upgrade. And maybe it's going to have one nerf too, we'll see. All right, so that's as much as we want to kind of, commit really solidly to. We have several more updates pretty solidly planned out for the next 3 at least, and then we're sketching in stuff for after that. But like I said, because we want the option to shift focus if we need to, we don't want to put the specifics out there early and end up in a place where we're committed. And on that topic, I wanted to just quickly talk about shield slaves. I know it's pretty memey at this point, but this is a really good example of what's tough. We have multiple times now with shield slaves had a window in 2 months where it appeared there was time to make them, and then priority shift. In the last case, 5.0 got changed to working on a totally different new player project over the summer and then pulled into Chaos Era stuff. And so they were just extremely busy, and the window they thought they would have disappeared. And that's pretty normal, and that's how we've gotten in trouble a lot in the past, saying we want to do this thing, we think we have a chance to do it on this timeline, and then things change around for good reason. The priorities change because something important other than that needs to happen. But then we end up having to drop that thing for a while. And so with Shield Slave specifically, it's half done. We absolutely want to do it. I don't know when that'll happen. It depends on when we get time to work on it. And what we're going to try and do is not say when we think that time's going to be, because obviously that doesn't work out super well. But they're not gone. They're not, never going to happen. It's just a matter of finding a spot, and Team Talos might be able to find a spot for that in the near future. So looking forward for us, though, in general, I want to talk about all the information we're gathering, talk about the areas that we think need attention, and I want you to try your best not to hold it against me, because none of this is, I don't know exactly which of this will happen when, but we're doing a ton of work to try and plan it out, and I like the idea of being able to talk to you guys about that so that you can give us better information and help guide us towards the right changes. So I'm just going to go through some of the areas that we want to work on, starting with wormholes, because nobody ever really does start with wormholes, and they deserve once in a while to be, yay. So the number one priority that we have for wormholes is talking about connectivity, and how everybody seems to agree that there needs to be it needs to be easier to find other people in wormholes, get connected to content, whether it's in null or to people PvEing in wormholes or to home systems, whatever it is. We have a lot of paths that we can pursue to make that happen, with kind of varying complexity and obstacles. So more statics is one option, adding new statics to existing systems and increasing the total amount of statics overall. This could be really cool. It could allow for more varied kind of setups. Right now, a lot of times, single statics force you into choosing a PvE or PvP and kind of pin you in a certain kind of arrangement. And if there's more options, maybe you get more varied terrain between different places you choose to live and get more options from the place you choose. And that all sounds really good. The downside is that it could potentially be a lot more work. Having statics means putting a lot of responsibility on you to build connections the way you want them, which means rolling more stuff. And I don't know, it could just lead to a place where there's kind of a lot more busy work, but not a huge change in connectivity, and that wouldn't be great. The easiest thing for us to do, or the kind of most simple and positive, is more wandering spawns. I think it's likely we'll do this very soon, just upping frequency on existing wandering distributions so that you're more likely to get connections just across all of wormhole space. That's something that yeah, seems very straightforward. And then the most complicated probably is K162 behavior. drawbridging sucks, and if we could open K162s right away, that would increase connectivity a lot. But there is definitely some big downsides there, and also some implementation complexity. So we're still exploring this and trying to figure out if it's going to be a good option, or if we need to change, some other behavior like the delay before the SIGs appear, as well as the actual spawning of them. And yeah, we just need to do more investigation there, basically. But connectivity is the biggest theme overall. The second biggest is just really strange risk-reward scenarios in wormholes. Astrohoos farming is pretty broken. The drifter behavior probably just needs to get changed so that it doesn't shoot an Astrohoos for as long as you want it to. That's a change that we can make pretty easily. MJDBSs are very safe and hard to catch, so more scram rats rather than disruptor rats, something like that could be a way to approach that. And then the biggest one, which is also very complicated, is the fact that wormholers basically have local through the immediate appearance of probe results on new SIGs and system. And we're talking about that too, whether there should be some delay after you punch in so that you have a window where you could actually catch people before they see SIGs and get safe. A little technical complexity there too, so I don't know how much investment that's going to be if we want to make that happen. One of the, I don't know, not the simplest area, but combat meta is another area for sure for wormholes. Facts are still causing a lot of issues. We made changes through diminishing returns recently and have made several nerfs to facts themselves, but at small scales, they're still really hard to deal with. Trig ships help, but probably there needs to be more adjustment here in some way so that they're a little easier for small groups to work around. Leshaks and Ickies are really powerful. Trig ships in general probably need a little toning down, but no. I mean, they're also super fun and have really, unlike a lot of other things that end up really powerful in EVE, they have pretty solid counters. So the more popular they get, the more likely it is that there's going to be damps and tracking disruptors and other things to shut off the disintegrator, in which case they turn into kind of crap. So it doesn't feel like there's a big emergency to do anything with them, but looking at things like increasing their mass a bit potentially, because we set that very low originally thinking they might not be that popular. Some smaller changes like that could be a good option. And then booshing was a part of this, but with the changes we just made, we'll definitely have to see where they end up. So that's the wormhole category. Oh yeah, the last thing, wormholes. Resource value is a big issue. I know a lot of people would love to have people mining gas, especially when they're newer, and just generally having more material value coming out of wormholes. And we would love that too, so wouldn't be surprised to see us start integrating material mats into builds for new things we make, just to up value from actually doing these activities in wormholes. All right, the big topic, structures and timers. Yeah, no pressure. This is a tough, obviously really tough topic, but let's take a look at a few pieces of it at least. We know low power structures are a problem. Want to make some changes here. There's several options. I mean, the most common suggestion, of course, is take away tether, take away all the timers, and drop loot on low power structures. We are looking at that. The problems we've run into is that all structures enter low power on the way to dying right now. Like when you're in hull, you're in low power, which means that would apply to all structures that died. You would drop loot every time and lose tether on every structure that was ever being killed, which means the perfect change. So we're looking at whether we need another state or we need some different behavior around low power itself so that we can facilitate these kind of changes. But we'll have some pieces of this at least before long, and then other pieces like if we want loot to drop or make changes to that, it could be a little longer as we have to figure out how to handle some of those complexities. Time zone tanking. We talked about this a ton at the summit. I feel like we have a lot of good information. I also feel like this is sort of inherently unsolvable on some level. So it's going to be a matter of just trying to work our way to a better place. There's some small changes we're really interested in just to make kind of a basic improvement to the situation, like taking away defender day setting, making it so you can't change timers in 7 days when you're not planning to defend. That kind of stuff's very easy to do and we'll probably do in the short term. And then the whole discussion around Straunt and having more call to action for defenders if they're going to try and defend a structure is really important, and we need to have kind of a bigger discussion about that, basically. I can't say whether or not we'll go one way or another. I think that going fully back to Straunt and ending up with trying to kite 40 timers at a time in a spreadsheet is pretty awful. So ideally, we would get to a middle ground where we have some of that call to action, an option for people to mess up and leave things too exposed, because that's good content generation. That would be really nice to have, but we have to figure out a way to get some of that back without going all the way to the incredible complexity of Straunt. And so look for these quicker adjustments earlier on, and then for us to try and figure out a better, system for providing some of that missing gameplay from Straunt a little further down the line. Spamming in enemy space is another thing. We have some, we can do something like not allow anchoring mediums if you have ADM3 in hostile space, or at least giving them less power when they're being used in enemy space. I think this is another thing we can do pretty easily. And then the last area is asset safety and reward for killing structures. And I think this is another two-piece one where the obvious and easy win is make it feel like it's actually worth it to kill structures. And there's probably many ways to do this, whether it's giving the killers some of the asset safety tax or finding another way to reward them for taking down structures. That feels like something without a lot of downside that we can just try and get done. Asset safety and sort of the idea that people shouldn't be able to keep things safe at all is just more complicated. We don't want people to not come back to the game. We don't want to make it just a terrible experience to live out of structures. And so we have to find a way to find that balance. But making it rewarding to kill structures should definitely happen, and we're going to look at ways to do that. Next up, faction warfare. Really want to give you guys some attention. I know it's been a while, and this one is really, like I said, we've almost gone into projects to rework faction warfare a couple times because we know there's so much potential here, so much value. As a transition system for new players into PvP or into social groups, it just looks like a really great home for really valuable changes, and I think that's a big part of why we haven't done anything, because we're like expecting that just around the corner we're going to redo the whole thing and try to leverage all the potential that's there. But by doing that, we've accumulated all this really awful debt, and we just need to try and clean some of that up in the meantime. The biggest thing, which is driving all the drama right now, of course, is mission payouts. This is pretty simple. I think we will probably just turn down level 4 payouts quite a bit so that they're not worth it for people to come in and steal all the LP out of the system. This should increase value for people actually running plexes and killing other faction warfare pilots a lot. And yeah, we're looking at kind of an exact design for how to do that right now, but that seems like the most obvious win that we can get. The other big area that's definitely more complicated is structures in faction warfare space and the role they play, how the war zone doesn't affect the structure. I think some of the first changes we make to structures in general, like the low power changes, we can leverage some of that to get some things in here so the war zone affects some of your structure performance in faction warfare, like not having tether if you don't own the system, that kind of thing. So that's another really big area. Gate sliding. This was kind of incidentally removed to get warp core stabs out of plexes. We still don't want warp core stabs out of plexes, but I think we underestimated how much faction warfare lost by losing gate sliding, so we can go back and look and see if we can find a way to keep the warp core stabs out while still giving this option so that people can get into the plexes for fights. And then there's simple cleanup stuff like the fact that pirates have higher priority than militia members, and so you accidentally shoot your friends. We can do some of those fixes as well. And then a kind of more fun shake-up thing we can do is add Plex types or change the way Plexes work so that they encourage more diversity and fitting. We've had this sort of same Plex arrangement in faction warfare for a long time, and it'd be pretty simple to change which classes are allowed or add new ones where whether it's only battle cruisers or you can be further from the button or you're scrammed while you're in there, whatever. We can do a lot with this. Now let's go through a little bit about ships and modules. This is definitely going to be the most staple thing for our team. It's kind of it's easy to keep this rolling alongside programming projects. So we'll probably have a really steady pace of ship and module stuff. A lot of the things that we have on the short list you guys have heard about before. Battleships is a huge one. I know people want to be in bigger ships, and we can do a lot with just sort of base stats, things like scan res, HP, potentially damage, even though it has scary implications for PvE in high-sec if we do that. But there's things we can do here, and we would love to do that, push battleships back towards being more popular, so that's high on the list. Dictors, there's only one, which is kind of silly. There's also only one kind of bubble. We could do other kinds of bubbles, so we've been talking about that a little bit. Some command ships, Absolutions, Astartes, Nighthawks. Some of the others could definitely use an update. That's another one. We've talked about Navy ships a lot. I've held off on making many Navy ship changes because I feel like there's potential for some really cool thematic things to do with Navy ships, like giving them better performance based on standing or based on how many faction modules you have fit or something like that. So they're all sitting, though, not getting used. Well, not all of them, but Navy Geddon, Navy Dami, Navy Scorp are getting like pretty much no use at all. So we have a lot of free reign there to go and do something more creative. Black Ops need an update. They have for 4 years or something, so they're on there. The stupidest ship in the game, the Griffin Navy issue. I wanted to talk a little bit about tier side because this comes up so much, and it's actually been a really long time since the tier side project. So in case anybody isn't familiar with it, originally in Retribution and before that, tier side was about taking ships that were in the system where they were arranged by power. So Stabber was better than a Bellicose, and a Rupture was better than a Stabber, which meant that the lower tier ones never got used at all. So we went through and leveled the field for all the ship classes so that ideally every ship had some role to play. And that was really amazing and fun because it basically put 50 new ships or 100 new ships in the game by rescuing all these ones that were getting no use beforehand. That was incredibly well liked and a great set of changes. Following that, we tried to do something similar with modules, although only for a certain portion of the module range. Modules are obviously tiered. Tier 2 is better than Tier 1. Faction is better than Tier 2 for the most part, all the way up. And the meta ones between Tier 1 and Tier 2, or Tech 1 and Tech 2, were a little awkward because most of them were pretty useless, and then you had like Arbalests or IFFAs or whatever. And so we went through and tried to rearrange these so that all the meta variations had some use, and then just get rid of the ones that didn't. And that was pretty cool. We're to the point now where outside of gun groups, there isn't a lot of really high impact groups left to change, which makes module tier side always feel a little lower impact for the work it would need compared to, if you look at the rest of this list, if you could have an update where we did battleship HP or updated dictors and added new bubbles, or you could get shield power relays module tier sided, I think most of the time people would pick the ship updates, and that's basically what we've been doing. And that's why it ends up falling behind. That doesn't mean we won't work on it. It's a really good summer project when there's no programming support. It's a really good project for new designers that are trying to learn how our authoring systems work. So we have come back to it, and we will continue to, and hopefully finish it eventually. But that's why you don't see it all the time. And then new ships and weapons as well are definitely on the table. We have a lot of really wacky concepts. We added entropic disintegrators a while back now, and that's been really an amazing thing to see, putting something completely new into the meta like that. And we were hoping, we put Triglavian ships into this precursor line with the idea that other more experimental weapon concepts could go in there as well. And we have those concepts. We're starting to kick them up again and get them going. So that's very exciting. Actually, I have a small story also about Triglavian ships. Because of the Dread, so we were getting wrong damage numbers on the Dread when we were testing it and couldn't figure out why. And so Team Event Horizon and CCP Signal did a bunch of digging and discovered that the ramp-up bonus was actually being counted in stacking penalties. So when you, right now, shoot a disintegrator, once the damage multiplier bonus from the ramp-up gets bigger than any bonuses from any entropic radiation sinks, those sinks get stacking penalized, even if there's only one. And we found this out because Siege, of course, gives 800%, which meant the ramp-up bonus itself was actually getting stacking penalized, which doesn't make any sense. So he's just fixed that by making it so that the ramp bonus is not counted in any stacking penalties, which means now all Triglavian ships have gotten a damage buff. Or at least they have when they have radiation sinks fit. So that could be a problem. We might have to turn their damage down a little. No. You guys would probably be fine if it just did like 10,000 damage from a cruiser. You'd be like, perfect. All right, so speaking of new concepts, we were actually going to announce, this is a weird thing to do, but we were expecting to announce a new bomb type yesterday, and we couldn't get the concept together in time, but I'm just going to tell you about it anyway, and then we can talk about it and see where we end up. So the idea here was to put in a new anti-capital bomb. Should have just put it in the keynote, I guess. So what we're trying to do here is give some added risk for caps without nerfing caps. We're definitely tired of nerfing caps. They're still too good, though. And so having some more asymmetric counters to caps from subcapitals would be great. Disintegrators were also, in a way, working on the same goal, but we are interested in more options for this. So we want a way to make it riskier to bring caps to the field when there's a lot of subcaps active. And at the same time, as always, we want to create new roles for subcaps and encourage diversity in subcap roles and cap roles as well. And we want to make sure that whatever we put in, it's got good counters on both sides, and it rewards some mastery and learning. And micro-jump field generators are a good example of that, where we succeeded, where both sides have some options, and there's a lot of depth to figuring out how to use them and wield them effectively. So that was the idea, and this is what we were expecting to put in. A bomb that travels slower, so 30 seconds to get to target instead of 15, but has the same range. Does 300k damage with 15k sig, so does almost no damage to subcaps. Even like a stationary battleship takes enough to survive. Instead of like focus bombs, we were planning to have some range on it, because that way they can kill each other. If we give it like a focus bomb 1 meter radius, you could have 60 of these launched at one time, and none of them would overlap and kill each other. So by putting a little bit of area on it, we make sure that you have to stagger them at least a little bit if you want to get effectiveness. And then for survivability, they would have large sig and low HP, so they would hurt each other, and they would also be killed easily by smart bombs or by defenders. So there's some options on the side of the caps to defend themselves. And this was pretty much what we were expecting to put in, but there's a lot of issues we ran into, and a lot of alternative designs as well. So the biggest issue was, what platform does this go on? Bombers obviously make the most sense, just intuitively, but bombers already have so much going for them. Bombers travel through wormholes incredibly well. They bridge through covert bridges. They cloak. They are actually really fantastic on grid already, just with torps. So giving them a whole nother thing to, this is kind of failing on that diversity of roles goal, because it's just pushing more power into somewhere there's already a lot, and we didn't like that. But then we start looking around for other homes. What if we made a heavy bomb launcher, which could only be fit by Tech 1 battleships and battlecruisers? Maybe good, but a little awkward. Thematically doesn't really make any sense. And also, it would be pretty, it feels like you'd have to make the bomb extremely good to make it likely that you're going to get bomb runs out of slow battleships. You have to move to where the fight is. But it's good for that to happen. We like the idea of those ships being in space and having to get to the grid and being another kind of mini objective for the enemies to try and take out. We talked about combat recons or Tech 3 cruisers. They're a little awkward because they already have other roles. Recons especially kind of feel like an okay fit, but with D-scan immunity and with the disruption bonuses, it's just kind of strange. It's like stacked on top rather than having any synergy. And so the most likely thing, or the thing that felt like it would fit best, is just have a new class, have a heavy bomber, maybe a Tech 2 attack battle cruiser, something like that. I mean, it sounds super cool. It's just a little more scope. You know, if we went that route, we would probably be able to do this in 2 months rather than in 2 weeks. Maybe that's fine. After this, we talked about you know, things that could go wrong. How does structure bashing work? Are people going to be able to farm NPCs hyper effectively with this much damage? What happens, you know, how do we make sure that you can't just, when someone lights a Sino, put all the bombs on the Sino, and before the caps have had time to spread out, you kill them all at once? Like, there's a lot of scary things about giving people 300K damage in one shot. And so then we started talking about alternatives, like maybe rather than damage, this should be doing something like reducing resists, reducing total HP, maybe giving remote rep impedance. There's a lot of options here as well. But we were still having this discussion on this page like 3 days ago, so we decided we probably shouldn't ship it in 2 weeks. But I thought you guys would like to hear about it, and it's you know, really close to being something that we can put in. So definitely tell me what you think if you see me over the next couple days, or on Discord or whatever. And the last area, we were talking about the future for us and talking about all the areas that really need attention in Eve. But we also, a big part of what we want to accomplish is keep this idea of kind of disrupting and challenging the established way things work by doing new things. And like you saw with Berger's ship at the end of the presentation yesterday, we're really excited about the idea of a more dynamic universe, things like weather systems, things like resource distributions that change depending on what you're doing. PvE is all old and needs changes. Things like geography and travel, you know, some people really want low-set gates to certain regions, and we could... Never gonna happen. But this kind of stuff is a big part of what we want to do. And the Halloween update is the thing you've seen so far that's closest to this, but we have a lot more concepts in progress that we can look into. So I guess I'm saying this to make sure that the idea for what we're going to be trying to accomplish isn't just maintenance on systems that haven't, you know, gotten to work in a long time. We want to do that as well, but we also want to be you know, doing more chaos era style changes that are really new and unexpected. And that's all I got for you guys. I look forward to talking to you all about it, and I'll see you in space.